Well, we were going to move to Sean Clemick, who's the Director of Research at the Center for Economic Studies at the Census Bureau. So think of that as the mothership of the RDC network. And
And that makes you the...
So
I'm the co-pilot of the mothership.
He engages and oversees, with and oversees the folks who review the proposals as they come in and makes the decision about whether they get directed off to IRS or off to NCHS or wherever. Visit with us a little bit here. Jonathan and Sean are also going to be in the afternoon session, so there'll be more opportunities. We will bump against time here. We have lunch being delivered, box lunches, and I'll spend a few minutes at the close of this session to give you an idea of where the seating opportunities are, and et cetera. But Sean, if you'd like to visit with us for a minute about some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's actually a little bit harder to go last because I was jotting notes down as I went, and it seems like there's lots of things to talk about. I'll give you a little bit of a brief history, just how I came to the Census Bureau. I was a graduate student at Penn State, and Mark Roberts was my advisor, and he was one of the very early users of census data, along with Tim Dunn, who was at the University of Oklahoma for a long time. And they basically needed someone to go to use census data, and I went to Carnegie Mellon. I actually arrived at Carnegie Mellon the day before the data arrived, where Brad Jensen, brought it to the center when we actually had data at the various locations. So I worked there for a number of years on an NSF project with them, basically extending the stuff they did on sunk costs and market structure and entry and exit, but applying it to regional manufacturing industries instead. So taking into account geographic markets instead of just national markets and industries. So that's how I got started. And then the job that I actually got at the Center for Economic Studies was a little bit unusual in the sense that I was hired to do a very specific task. That's not usually the case when we hire economists at CES. And that task was actually to recode the 1992 Census of Retail Trade and Census of Wholesale Trade from an SIC basis to a NAICS basis. So I don't know if anybody here uses business data, but the revision from SIC to NAICS, I think people have finally given up on only doing work to 1997. They actually want to use the later years of manufacturing data. And that's kind of a nice segue to the vast majority of the people at the Census Bureau are simply busy collecting all of the data that you would like to do research and use. And they often don't have time to match to lots of interesting external data sets that you guys know about. They probably don't even know about them, for one, and B, they probably don't have time to actually match them and do some of the interesting things that you do. So there's a niche for everyone in here to kind of match these data sets in, corroborate the kind of things that we're doing, but most of the people are, designing the forms, thinking about constructing the sample, following up with firms, making phone calls, sending letters, trying to get them to respond. Not everyone, you may be surprised, but not everyone actually responds to our surveys and even censuses. And then there's lots and lots of data to process. I jotted down, so people who are familiar with the decennial, I think there's two forms. On the business side, at least in the 2007 economic census, there were 387 different forms that businesses could fill out. The 4.5 million establishments that were sampled in the census, that's 20,000 plus different data items, product data, materials data, lots of basic items that we collect across all the businesses. So you may find a problem with one of the variables, but there are lots of variables out there. And I guess if we didn't make mistakes, then there would be fewer places for you guys to find benefits to the Census Bureau if we did it perfectly. So that's one thing. I think that the mothership is actually here to help. lots of the economists. So we for instance, I worked with a student intern, a graduate student, to try to put NAICS industry codes on every establishment going back to the early 1970s for the entire time series that we have business register data. Because everyone's going to have to deal with the problem of SIC to NAICS, right? So this is one of the ways that we sort of improve upon the data infrastructure that we make available to researchers. Brad Jensen's project, matching trade transactions to the business register, was mentioned. So that's actually something, the early work that they did doing the matching has been taken over by some of the economists. So not only do they review the proposals, but they also take over some of the data creation and data infrastructure projects that start at research data center projects, and then everyone, there's a community, other people find out that people are doing that kind of work and could really benefit from it themselves. They start requesting it, but then someone has to maintain that over time, and that's what the people in my office do. So the people that report to me, there's a group of economists that are focused on business data. They'll review a lot of the business proposals that come through. Then there's a group of LEHD economists. Most of their time is spent building the LEHD infrastructure and working on the public data.
Give them the one-sentence definition of LEHD.
The linked employer or employee household dynamics program. So the linked employer-employee data. Sorry, acronyms. You forget how much they. Someone mentioned PPS. That's a predominant purpose statement, by the way. I don't know if everyone knows that.
LEHD,
but it's even more obscure, I think.
LEHD is taking every single person who ever had a job and linking them to who their employer is or was. Quarterly, going back to 1990. So remember when I said at the beginning, if only I had more data, be careful what you wish for?
So I think one project that I'll mention, that's sort of a research data center project that I think has had an interesting benefit, is Gail mentioned that even within detailed industries, there's a lot of heterogeneity. And there's a project by Kirk White, Emil Petrin, and Jerry Ryder, who's a statistician at Duke. And what they do is actually look to see if some of the dispersion is either attributed to or dampened by the imputation that the Census Bureau does in the census of manufacturers. So what they do is actually, in the newer years, you can actually look at only the data that was collected. Okay, so there's been no work by the Census Bureau on some of the data. So you can get into the files, look at only the data as it was reported by the respondents. As disk space has gotten cheaper, it's easy to store virtually everything about the process. And what they do is they multiply impute everything to basically, make the data set rectangular, and so they can look at what does productivity look like when you only look at the collected data versus the multiple imputed data versus what the Census Bureau would report. And what they find is that there's even more heterogeneity and dispersion and productivity, than what the data that we provide to researchers in general provide. So I think that's an interesting, so will that eventually have some feedback into how data is imputed at the Census Bureau? Potentially. And I think that's the other place where my office comes in. The Census Bureau is a big place. There's 5,000 people at headquarters working on all these surveys. You probably don't want to go to weekly meetings about how the economic census is being conducted. So a lot of the changes in surveys, new questions being added, new initiatives being done at the Census Bureau, those all create potential benefits of new projects that happen in the RDCs. And it's up to us at CES to get the word to the administrators who can help you with the set of potential benefits to the Census Bureau. And there are a lot. So I think I'm running over time a little bit, so I'll let everybody just kind of ask questions.
Okay. Well, the microphone helps Thank you. My name is Cesare Fracassi. I'm from UT Austin. My question is, when does the center open, and when do you start taking proposals? And then the third question is, can I use any center around the U.S. or just this one? I have a co-author from UCLA, so can he work at the UCLA center, and can I work here on the same proposal?
In sequence, starting from the back. If you have an approved project, in theory, it can be conducted in any existing RDC and transferred to anyone as researchers change positions or geographically are mobile. There could be occasions, I guess, where that has to be negotiated, but I've heard it described along those lines. Is that?
So I was going to say there's the actual access to the physical RDC is sort of managed by the actual RDC themselves. They're separate entities in terms of that access. What the Census Bureau provides is just the computing infrastructure. So you can access the same servers and the same space from any of the locations, but in terms of actually, paying for the access to one location, that would have to be negotiated at the local RDC.
We're under a consortium model. So UT is part of the consortium. UT researchers get in essentially free, or if there's some modest cost that's required to meet our expenses, it'll be across the board. If you have a collaborator at another university where there's an RDC, they might have a lab fee structure, maybe a different basis. As long as within that structure you're covered, you can move back and forth. I think.
But if your co-author was at Duke, then they just walk in the lab, the same badge opens the door, the same login, logs into the computer account, and you can both set it at the computer in two different labs, be looking at the same files, and talk on the phone about what you want to do next.
And our goal is to be open early fall. And so September would be really neat. That would be perfect. We have to jump through some significant hoops. We have to implement renovations to create a room that meets the security requirements under some federal guidelines that are in a book this thick. And so that's part of my job for this year. And with a little luck, it will all get done. And that's our goal. The timeline is such that if you wanted to walk in the door, say September, you'd be working on a proposal now. You heard Matthias talk about the security clearance check and the length of time it takes for the proposal itself to be reviewed and vetted. And if it's not accepted, you have to repeat that so you don't get the benefit of kind of the revise and resubmit process. So I think the wise thing to do is start early. And the proposal development program that we have is trying to be geared to that time frame so that we hope to make money available by May 1st. And if you were able, your estimate was, somebody gave an estimate for preparing a proposal that 2 weeks to a month of intensive effort.
That's a little optimistic.
If you have experience.
I'd increase that. I mean, different research groups, have different sort of timelines for how quickly they respond. At Triangle, our administrator works very closely with the researchers. We don't want to submit anything, to Census that we aren't, 100% sure will get approved. It might get bounced back for some tweaks, but we don't want to go back and forth several times. So we work closely with the administrators. But yes, I mean, once you've got your own experience with this stuff, you sort of know which hoops you have to jump through. Then the process is more like Matthias described.
So if you're a first-timer like me, you should allow more time.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that on the business side, the economists in the Center for Economic Studies really are sort of the researchers at the Census Bureau on the econ side. That's sort of traditionally been true. I know that there are researchers, if a lot of you have used the public use data, you may know lots of researchers at the Census Bureau on the demographic and the decennial side. So you may be working with them on your proposal because they're really the data experts. That's not an area of expertise sort of within CES. And all I would say is that if you're sort of working with those those researchers, you should just make sure that the local RDC administrator and executive director sort of know that you're doing that. Because sometimes there are proposals that get submitted and no one has ever heard of it before, and then there are differences about sort of using the research data centers versus kind of working with they don't know anything about how the research data centers work. So we don't want to necessarily be surprised, but we're only there to kind of help. So make sure that the local admin and the executive director Mark are involved, so that so at least they're aware that you're talking with folks at Census that on a project.
In November, when Ron Jarman and Lucia Foster from CES and the Census Bureau were here, one of the things they suggested was that if you know of a person at Census or in one of the statistical agencies who could be a collaborator, reach out to them and see if they'd be interested, because their eyes will be open to things that we might not have experience in. I think we have time for another question. Or do that answer all of your questions?
My question is regarding the fake data that Dr. Carrick mentioned. Is there any sample that is already done? Because I was thinking, if you don't know the parameter of the specific field, you might make the fake data with the wrong parameter, and then when you go to the center, you just embarrass yourself because your model doesn't run. So can you get a sample that is already on the right parameter, like let's say 2 decimals, and maybe this one is latitude, longitude, whatever the fields need, so you don't create a wrong fake data set?
I'm going to defer.
So
you only embarrass yourself in front of yourself, so your code won't run. Well, I mean, you need experience with the data. You know, it's, let's say in a SAS data set, is it a number, or is it a character thing, even if it's a numeric string, so to say. So there's some things you need to know a little bit how things are called. I think pre-creating code is really helpful if you have stuff that needs a long time to run and you don't want to come to a lab, send off the code, and then it runs for a couple of hours, and then you just sit there and you have a waste of time. So for things that need that long, typically estimations or Monte Carlos or so, and that is something that, I mean, you will probably create how to write that code, and that doesn't depend so much on the data themselves. For the data work themselves, you have to know them a little bit, but then there's also the virtual RDC, right, at Cornell. So you can go to a website where there are some fake data sets where you can practice. It's called Virtual RDC, and I actually have never done it, so I don't have experience with that, but I'm sure they have every data set.
So there, I believe for just about every data, there are 0 observation SAS files. So you can see the variable names. You can find out, this particular plant level identifier is, a numeric, or it's a string, or some of those kinds of things. So you can see the 0 observation SAS files. And I'll stand up a little bit for Jerry Ryder from the statistics department. I don't think he would like the term fake data sets. There are, at the virtual RDC, a number of synthetic data sets for which a significant amount of statistical research has gone into to make them, to some extent, observationally and structurally consistent, but not confidential. I think that includes the SIP, actually I don't remember all the LEHD. So for some of the data sets, and in fact I think, I don't know if Jerry Ryder's life goal is to do synthetic data sets for every single census data set. I imagine if NSF wrote him a big enough check, then he would probably take that on. But there's ongoing work to try to.
I think his next one is the annual survey of manufacturers.
Okay, so Jerry's looking at creating, and his group is looking at creating a synthetic version of the annual survey of manufacturers. So I think that resource is going to grow. But if you're just sort of curious as to what all the files at Census, sit on the server as SAS files. you're not required to do the programming in SAS, but you're going to have to at least know of SAS to get your variables and dump them into something else that you are more comfortable in. So if that's Stata or what have you. So.
Out here in the public world, I can use a program like Systat to convert a SAS data set into a Stata data set. Is there any analog to that?
No, but the administrators have 5 lines of SAS code that will extract, that will give you an example of how to get it into Stata or to a different statistical program that is on the RDCs. So.
Okay, well, we're bumping on time here, so let's. I have a couple of quick comments about how lunch is organized. But first, I think this has been really helpful. I want to thank you all for your time. We have an afternoon session structured the same way. It'll have much more of a focus on demographic, health, and planning-related research. So I invite all of you to return for that. There'll be a new group of people joining us. Just to give you an idea, across the hall in the break room is where the box lunches are set up. There are 2 doors to that break room, so if you take a right, come in the door on the back side of the building and then work your way through. That could help the traffic flow. Behind this auditorium are some restrooms, if you're not already aware of that. They're right behind us. And then these rooms that are in yellow here are the rooms associated with the RDC. And to orient you, the rooms are right over here. The doors are open. There are tables set up. Just take your box lunch in, grab some stuff, whatever your chips, your drinks, your cooler chest of beer that you brought. Head over, hunker down, have lunch. We'll be resuming here at 1:15. And the hats that we were using here, there's a purpose to them. If you see a table with a hat, a panelist is there. They may just put it there. Some of you may wish to take the opportunity to say hi and introduce yourself, talk a little bit. They're gracious enough to do it. They'll need some time to themselves also. But that's one of the opportunities of this workshop day. So, have at it.